Skin. That's what we're talking about today. What you have in front of you now is something called Skin Functions Chart. It's intense. If you look on the left-hand side, it said protects deeper tissue from, and it gives you a list of stuff. This is the stuff you need to know. So it protects deeper tissue from mechanical damage, chemical damage, bacterial damage, ultraviolet radiation, thermal damage, desiccation, drying out, okay? So it protects it from a lot of stuff. The skin is magnificent. You just take advantage for it because we don't think much about it. But it is truly fascinating how the skin works. Now on the right hand side, you see it's how it's accomplished. So what I would do on your notes is I would set up a chart just like this, a T-chart. Functions, how accomplished. Boom, boom, right through. I'd list mechanical damage and I would abbreviate what happens over here on the other ones. All right, make sure to do that and then go to the next slide. And here's an extension of that chart called Functions of the Integumentary System. Remember, the skin is called the integumentary system. You have to know that. Got to know that term. It aids in body heat loss or heat retention controlled by the nervous system. Again, sweating. I'll go into it. Again, abbreviate what you see there. And aids in excretion of urea and uric acid. Okay, when you sweat, you also get out bad things from your body. And in fact, if you ate a lot of garlic for dinner and you sweat, you'd be able to smell the garlic through your sweat. Happens all the time. And synthesize vitamin D, all right? Very important. We're going to talk about how the skin is set up, the general structure, all right? The epidermis is the outer layer. Remember, epi meaning outer. Just like on your test, epimysium meaning the outer layer surrounding the muscle. All right, so the epidermis, a stratified squamous epithelium, are the cells that are involved in the outer epidermis. Okay, it's often keratinized. Keratin, protein, hardened by fibrous protein, keratin. Following the epidermis, you have the dermis. The dermis is the layer of dense, irregular connective tissue. Supports and nourishes epidermis. It's highly vascular. Vascularized means blood vessels. Okay, so the dermis is vascularized. The epidermis is not. So, picture yourself falling down and scraping your hand, and your hand does not bleed. If you take off the top layer of your skin, it's not going to bleed. It doesn't have blood vessels. But the dermis, the layer right below, does. That's why that one bleeds. So the epidermal and dermal junction is characterized by downward folds of the epidermis. They're called epidermal ridges, which interrogate with upward projections of dermis. All right, you don't really need to know that term. You don't need to know anything in there except for that they meet one another through these folds. It's really what it's telling you. Remember, this is a college textbook, and I haven't seen some of these words since I was in college, so you don't necessarily need all of them either. All right, now look, this is a diagram of the skin and some of the functions you'll need to know. You're going to put this diagram in your sketchbook next week. You don't have to do it today. We're going to do some other stuff this week. So next week, we're going to sketch this, and we're going to be able to label some of the parts in here. But you'll notice one thing that's cool is there's a muscle in the skin. It's called the Erector Pili muscle. And when your hair stands up, this is the muscle that makes your hair follicle stand up, which is pretty cool. Now below the dermis is another layer called the hypodermis. It's called subcutaneous tissue. Sub meaning below, cutaneous meaning skin. So it's not technically classified as a layer of the skin, but you will see it in the skin models. The hypodermis is deep to the dermis. It's technically, like I said, not part of the skin, and it's largely adipose tissue. If you don't remember, adipose tissue is fat tissue. And if you look at the scan next to us, this is a CT, vertical CT scan. They cut the person in multiple spots. The top scan is actually a little different than the bottom scan. I don't know if you can see that, how it's folded there. It's the page in the book. That's why it looks that way. So this is a very large person. You see the size of the enlarged heart over here, and you see the excess mass around the outside here, and then a large portion of the intestine and stomach. And again, this is just a review of keratinizing or keratin. All right, cells from keratin have fibrous protein that makes cells tough and chemically resistant. That process is called keratinizing, when cells become full with keratin. Okay, two main layers of the epidermis, and if you look over here to the right, you will see that the top portion of this cross-section of skin is the epidermis. And you'll notice the first one is labeled stratum corneum, all right, and stratum lucidum, all right? So the stratum corneum and stratum lucidum are the two parts of the epidermis. And you'll see that the stratum corneum is much of the first layer, and then the lucidum is just right below it, this bottom portion right here. But remember, the epidermis is the top part of the layer. So these two parts make up of the epidermis. And you'll see the stratum lucidum, formed only transparent dead cells, occurs only in thick hairless skin of the palms of hands and soles of the feet. That's the only place you're going to find this. And the stratum corneum is the outermost layer of skin, which is much more prevalent. So what are the layers of the epidermis? Here they are listed for you. Stratum basale, stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, stratum lucidum, hairless only in that one section, and stratum corneum. All right, so those are the layers of the epidermis. Now our last slide for today is going to be talking about the dermis. Okay, the dermis has two layers. The papillary layer, the upper dermal region, projections called dermal papillae, and we'll get to those. Some contain capillary loops, meaning that they get blood vessels going through there. Others house pain receptors and touch receptors. And there's different corpuscles and different things in there. This one's called Messner's corpuscle. All right, loose areolar connective tissue is also involved in there. So what you need to know is the first layer, the papillary layer, all right, has possible containing these things, depending upon where in the skin, where in the body they're located. They may contain one or all of these things, okay? The reticular layer is the deepest skin layer, and that contains the blood vessels, sweat and oil gland, which we need, and we really need the oil. It's really important. And deep pressure receptors and dense irregular connective tissue. And we'll get to the reasons of all these and what they look like in a different set of notes.